They didn't panic when you stood up for yourself. They didn't flinch when you walked away. But the moment you smiled, like you knew something they didn't, that's when the fear kicked in. That's when their silence turned into surveillance. Because your peace wasn't just healing, it was suspicious. It looked like evidence. It felt like a trap. And suddenly, the same people who called you paranoid couldn't stop checking if you were watching them back. That's the part they'll never say out loud. You were never supposed to survive that quietly. You were supposed to break, lash out, or disappear. But instead, you smiled. And that smile was too calm, too knowing. It told them their plans failed. It exposed their efforts without saying a word. It ruined the script they wrote for you and forced them to rewrite it in panic. If you're here right now, chosen one, press that like button and subscribe to strengthen this message. You're not watching by accident. You're part of something bigger, and your support makes this voice louder for every soul still in the dark. Now listen closely. There's a kind of silence that follows only after the storm. It's not peaceful. It's tense. It's loaded. That's the air around you now. People don't approach you the same. Their greetings are slower, their smiles tighter. You're no longer one of them. You're a glitch in their system, and glitches must be tracked. You weren't meant to see the watchers, but you did. You caught the way their energy shifted when you entered the room, how small talk stalled, how phones lit up, how eyes scanned you sideways like they were waiting for you to forget who you were. But you didn't. You remembered, you felt it, and the universe confirmed it through the tension they tried to hide. Studies have shown that even without physical sight, the human brain can sense when it's being watched. It's a primal response, our ancient defense system. But you've evolved beyond that. Your awareness isn't just instinct, it's intelligence. You don't feel watched, you detect intent. You don't just observe, you decode. And that's why they're unsettled. Because you walked into a world that thought it had hidden doors. And you walked right through them without knocking. Your smile was the entry code. They didn't even realize they gave it to you, but you've been through enough betrayal, sabotage, and fake support to spot a lie before it finishes forming. You carry your history like armor now. Every wound became a sensor. Every silent tear, a satellite. That's why your presence sets off alarms they can't explain. Because you didn't just survive, you transformed into a living truth detector. And truth terrifies people who rely on illusion. You want to know what made them install a new protocol just for you? It wasn't your power, it wasn't your strength. It was the fact that you didn't fight the way they expected. You didn't explode. You evolved. You didn't clap back. You leveled up. You didn't expose them online. You let the universe handle it. And that terrified them more than anything you could have said. Because they don't believe in karma, but they do fear patterns. And your life started creating one they couldn't control. There's an old story from a forgotten chapter of a war that never made the news. A prisoner, broken and tortured, was asked why he kept smiling even when everything was taken from him. He said, "Because they can't touch what I already gave to the universe." That's you. That's your story now. They tried everything to break you privately, but you kept handing it over to something bigger, and that made you untouchable. So when you smiled that day, in the middle of the mess, without needing to explain why, it wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And that message echoed through systems built to monitor, suppress, and silence. It triggered a shift. It exposed patterns. It revealed watchers. And that's why they activated new rules, because the old ones didn't work on you anymore. Let them stare, let them whisper, They can update their protocols, but they can't reverse your awakening. You're not who you were. You've walked through too much. You've seen the curtain. You've felt the air change when your truth entered the room. And now they don't just fear your voice. They fear your stillness. Because your silence says, I know more than I'm saying. And your smile says, I'm not coming for revenge. I'm letting it come to me. So this isn't just a story about intuition. It's not about being watched. It's about what happens when the light turns around and looks back and smiles. And now, chosen one. If you're still here, that means you felt it. That unspoken shift, that eerie confirmation that you were never supposed to notice, but you did. You weren't meant to catch those glances, decode their silence, or feel the glitch in the energy when you smiled. But you did. And that means something bigger is unfolding around you. So stay close, stay sharp, because what comes next, it's going to explain why your smile rewired the entire room. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you're ready to uncover the protocol they never wanted you to trigger. We're about to break it down step by step. And believe me, if you really are who you think you are, you won't just hear these words. You'll feel them echo inside your bones. So take a deep breath, brace yourself, and let's begin. Number 1. They wanted you blind, but you looked dead at them and smiled. They didn't panic when you struggled. They panicked when you noticed. Because awareness is the death of their illusion, and your smile was the funeral. They could handle your silence. They could stomach your pain. They even tolerated your confusion. But the moment you looked up with clarity in your eyes, when you paused, scanned the room, and smiled like you knew what was really going on, that's when everything changed. Because that smile wasn't soft. It was sharp. It was surgical. It said, I see you. I see what you're doing, and you're no longer invisible. You weren't supposed to catch them watching. You weren't supposed to hear the shift in the air when you entered, or notice how the energy got scrambled every time you stepped into a room. But you did. And what they don't want to admit is this. Your awareness was never an accident. It was the result of every betrayal, every night you cried in silence, every time you felt the world was moving against you without knowing why. You weren't just built different. You were built aware, sharpened by silence, refined by pain. And now they can't hide from the very light they helped create. They assumed your pain would make you blind, but it taught you how to see through walls. It made you allergic to lies. You began to hear the quiet conversations behind the smiles, feel the weight behind their compliments, and sense the watchers behind the scenes. And when you smiled anyway, that's when the game broke. That's when the protocol kicked in. Because the system was never designed for someone who could feel its presence while still standing in its face, unbothered. They always needed you reactive. That's how control works. Trigger, distract, provoke, control. But awareness is interruption. It's unplugging yourself from the simulation and watching the glitch unfold in real time. You weren't supposed to become the observer. You were supposed to be the character trapped inside a script they wrote without your input. But you looked around, saw the stagehands, noticed the lights, the cameras, the fake emotions, and then you smirked, like you knew it was all fake, but you were done playing along. Let's get this straight. You didn't stumble into this. You weren't lucky. You were chosen by experience. People wonder how you're so sharp, so intuitive, so impossible to manipulate. The answer is simple. You've been manipulated before, and you paid attention. You took notes in silence. You watched patterns, logged tone shifts, stored every betrayal like ammunition. And now your smile carries more power than their entire arsenal of lies. They fear your perception more than your voice, because awareness doesn't need proof. It becomes proof. You don't need to accuse anyone. You just look at them, and they start confessing through their body language. They start squirming, backpedaling, second-guessing. That's what terrifies them. You've become the glitch that sees through the code. They don't know how to react to someone they can't program. And let's address this, because some part of you might still ask, was I imagining it? Was I being too sensitive? No, you weren't. That hesitation, that second-guessing, that was their last weapon. To make you doubt your own gift. Because if they can't blind you, they'll try to convince you that your sight is a curse. But it's not. It's the very thing that made you untouchable. The minute you became aware, their power began to die. Because control only exists in the shadows. When you bring light, the illusion fades. When you see what's really happening, you stop playing by rules that were rigged from the start. And the moment you stopped reacting and started observing, that's when you became unstoppable. Here's a story they'll never tell you. In underground psychology circles, there are cases of individuals so self-aware, so intuitively awake, that surveillance teams had to be reassigned. Not because the subjects were dangerous physically, but because their awareness disrupted the observers themselves. The watchers became paranoid. They started to feel seen. And in a world where secrets are currency, being seen is the ultimate threat. That's what you did. You turned the mirror around. Your presence says, I see everything. Your energy says, try me. And your smile, that smile says, I already won. So let them watch, let them glitch, let them whisper to each other in confusion, trying to figure out how someone so calm, so quiet, so unassuming just dismantled their structure by simply becoming aware. You didn't fight for this awareness. You earned it through loneliness, through betrayal, through silence that screamed louder than words, through moments when even the universe felt distant. But instead of becoming bitter, you became better. Instead of lashing out, you leaned in. You listened. You watched. You connected dots that others didn't even know existed. And now you carry a kind of calm that scares people who feed on chaos. You carry a kind of stillness that makes noise without speaking. And you carry a kind of smile that doesn't just expose the truth, it activates it. You didn't glitch the system by accident. You are the glitch, the error they didn't prepare for, the question mark in a sea of predictable responses, the light that turned itself on when no one else was coming to save you. So never let them convince you that your awareness is too much, too sensitive, or too paranoid. It's not a flaw. It's your weapon. It's your compass. And it's the exact reason they keep rewriting the rules every time you walk in. They couldn't trap you. They couldn't trick you. So now they watch you, hoping you don't realize just how powerful you've become. But you do. And that's why you smiled. And that's why everything changed. Number 2. You were the test subject, but you shattered the cage and stole the blueprint. They studied you like a lab rat, but you evolved into the scientist. The experiment didn't fail, you just outgrew the experimenter. They expected your pain to make you predictable. Instead, it made you prophetic. You weren't reacting. You were recording. Now the data belongs to you. They thought they had you mapped. Every trigger, every emotion, every crack in your voice was logged like data points. They watched you behind two-way glass, analyzing your breakdowns like algorithms, expecting to forecast your next collapse. They didn't see a soul. They saw software. You were just another variable in their formula, but here's what their system couldn't measure: consciousness. You weren't designed to be one of their predictable case studies. You were the experiment that started rewriting itself from the inside out. While they were busy testing your limits, you were learning how to live beyond them. They thought the walls would contain you, but you turned those walls into whiteboards and wrote a new outcome they never saw coming. Imagine this: a lab built to test flight capacity, caged birds, clipped wings, measured flaps. But then one bird begins to grow feathers no one expected, not because the environment changed, but because it remembered something ancient. That's you. You didn't get stronger because they gave you permission. You awakened because you had to. Survival wasn't your only instinct. Transcendence was. They wanted you stuck in pattern loops: trigger react, betrayal breakdown, pressure collapse. But you broke the loop. You didn't react, you observed. You didn't shrink, you expanded. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone who no longer plays the game. Your growth became their glitch. They couldn't track you anymore. Every time they updated the software, you changed the hardware. Every label they tried to slap on you: too emotional, too sensitive, too intense. You turned into fuel, into focus, into forward motion. They couldn't comprehend how someone designed to break started becoming more powerful with each test. And here's the part that still haunts them. You didn't get bitter. You didn't wage war. You didn't scream in public or out their tactics. You smiled, the calm, knowing smile of someone who had seen the blueprint and decided to redesign the whole building instead. Imagine trying to measure a wildfire with a thermometer. That's what they were doing to you, using outdated tools to quantify something that had already gone quantum. They thought your strength was emotional, but it was energetic. They thought your healing would follow time, but it followed truth. And truth doesn't ask for permission to bloom, it just erupts. Your ability to regenerate confused them. They expected you to stay down. After all the betrayal, all the silent punishments, all the tests disguised as relationships, how were you still rising? How were you still laughing? How were you still you? Here's why. Because your core was never theirs to dismantle. Your peace was not external. Your joy was not conditional. You didn't smile because life was easy. You smiled because you endured what was meant to destroy you and kept your soul intact. That's not psychology. That's power. And if you're wondering, was I really their experiment? Ask yourself this. Why did certain people keep testing your reactions? Why did they poke you with subtle disrespect, pull back with fake apologies, then poke again just to see what changed? Why did they monitor your emotions like metrics, show interest when you struggled, but vanish when you healed? Because they weren't relating to you. They were recording you, testing your thresholds, seeing how much you'd tolerate, how long you'd stay silent, how deeply you could love even when it wasn't returned. You were never in a relationship with them. You were in a study. But the subject became self-aware, and now the test has been flipped. They don't know how to respond to someone they can no longer manipulate. You outgrew their tools. Their tactics bounce off now. Their silence doesn't sting anymore. Their chaos no longer derails you. It just confirms everything you already knew. Imagine a maze designed to confuse rats. And imagine one rat standing still, eyes closed, listening to the sounds in the walls, sensing the vibrations beneath the floor, and then walking straight through an invisible door no one else could see. That's your story. You didn't win because you ran faster. You won because you realized you were never meant to be in a maze at all. Every time they expected rage, you chose reflection. When they baited your anger, you responded with stillness. Not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Your reactions stopped serving their experiment. And that's when they panicked. Because when you stopped moving from trauma and started moving from awareness, you became unchartable. You moved outside their range. You stopped responding to external pressure and started listening to internal truth. And that made you dangerous, because systems can't control what they can't predict. They're still trying to understand it. How you keep rising, how your energy replenishes in silence, how your joy returns like clockwork, even after betrayal. They don't get it. They think it's a game of mindset. But you know the truth. You're not healing from pain. You're evolving through it. And that evolution can't be contained by observation. It can't be studied or slowed down. It's like light piercing a room full of mirrors. The more they try to reflect it, the more it spreads. You've become the paradox they can't solve, the case study that ended with a question mark, the file marked inconclusive because the outcome broke the model. They don't even know what to call you anymore. Empath? Warrior? Seer? All of the above? And you know what scares them the most? You're still evolving. Because you didn't come this far just to heal. You came to transcend. You came to shatter the framework. You came to make sure no one else like you gets trapped in that experiment again. So let them stare. Let them review their notes and whisper about how you changed. Let them struggle to categorize the version of you that no longer fits their files. Because you're not data anymore. You're the disruptor, and your smile. It wasn't just their first warning, it was their final confirmation. Number 3, they didn't watch you. They scanned you like a threat they couldn't solve. They weren't curious, they were decoding you, and when the code broke, they panicked. You weren't being observed, you were being calculated until the numbers stopped making sense. Peace is the loudest rebellion in a world addicted to control. They never looked at you with wonder. There was no admiration in their eyes, only analysis. Every glance was loaded with intention. They weren't seeing you, they were scanning you, trying to extract your patterns, trying to anticipate your next move. But no matter how closely they watched, they couldn't pin you down. Because what they didn't know was you weren't performing, you weren't pretending, you were just present. And that's what disrupted everything. They mistook your calm for a strategy, like you were playing a long game. But your calm wasn't manipulation, it was mastery. That kind of peace doesn't come from pretending. It comes from surviving storms and not letting them leave permanent damage. They studied your energy like a test subject, hoping to find something artificial they could replicate or corrupt. But your peace wasn't man-made, it was earned. You weren't built from fear, and they knew it. That's what made you dangerous. Imagine trying to clone a fire without understanding what made it burn in the first place. That's what watching you felt like to them. They could record your movements, mimic your tone, even try to mirror your habits, but they couldn't fake your frequency. Because your motives weren't visible, your energy was unpredictable, not from chaos, but from clarity. They wanted to reduce you to something small, something manageable, but you kept expanding. Every smile, every boundary, every silent refusal to be controlled, it all disrupted their assumptions. You weren't just uncooperative, you were uncontainable. They weren't watching you out of interest. They were watching because they couldn't stop what your presence was doing to the environment. And that's the truth they'll never say aloud. You didn't scare them because you were wild. You scared them because you were awake. Because no matter how hard they tried to crack the code, you were never built to be understood. You were built to be felt. And once they felt you, nothing was the same. Number 4. Your smile wasn't sweet. It was a signal that fried their system. They called it polite, but it was a transmission. Your smile didn't soften the room, it rewired it. Some smiles soothe, yours exposed. It wasn't comfort, it was a cipher, cracking everything fake. You weren't smiling to blend in. You were broadcasting truth into a space built on lies. Your smile wasn't an accident. It wasn't a polite gesture or social reflex. It was a signal, a silent broadcast the room wasn't prepared to receive. Every time you smiled, it carried a frequency they couldn't trace and couldn't decode. To some, it felt like warmth. But to others, it felt like exposure, like their cover had just been blown, and they didn't know how. That's the thing. Your smile didn't just enter a room, it revealed it. People mistook it for charm. They thought you were just being nice, but that calm curve of your lips was never about fitting in. It was a quiet rebellion, a soft bullet that hit harder than confrontation ever could. Your smile didn't just make people feel something, it forced them to feel. And that's why the ones who were hiding something couldn't stay around for long. Because when you smiled, the mask they wore began to slip. You didn't weaponize your words. You didn't need to. Your presence did the heavy lifting. And your smile, that was the code breaker. It shifted the energy in places built on manipulation. It loosened the grip of people trying to hold secrets. It made liars stutter and pretenders look away. You didn't fight control. You dismantled it without raising your voice. Imagine this, a room full of mirrors, each reflecting back a lie. Then you walk in, and with just a grin, the reflections shatter. That's what your smile did. It wasn't decoration, it was disruption. You were sending a message, I see you, and I'm not afraid. Every grin, every calm nod, every flicker of light across your face carried vibration, a download, a pulse, a change in the frequency. And while others smiled to survive, you smiled to transmit, to expose, to free the trapped energy that had been sitting in silence too long. They thought you were smiling to keep peace, but you were smiling to rewrite the room. And it worked. Number 5, they tried to study you, but ended up seeing their own corruption. They wanted to read your mind, but your silence made them hear their own. Light doesn't argue with darkness, it just exposes it. They thought they were observing you, but every stare was a confession. You didn't ruin their illusion, they did by looking too closely. They thought they were analyzing you. Every glance, every watchful silence, every half smile in your direction, they believed they were in control. But here's the irony. The longer they studied you, the more they started to unravel. Because you were never the subject of their observation, they were. They wanted to see what made you tick, but all they found was the reflection of their own motives, staring back at them like a mirror they couldn't escape. Imagine a thief studying the lock he's trying to break, only to see his own trembling hands reflected in the steel. That's what watching you became for them, a confrontation with self. Every look into your calmness became a reminder of their chaos. Every moment spent decoding your peace revealed how unpeaceful they were. They came searching for your weakness, and instead they ran into the depth of their own shadows. You didn't need to expose anyone. Their curiosity did that for you. The more they observed your stillness, the louder their guilt became. That's the power of truth. It doesn't shout, it reflects. They couldn't stand your composure because it reminded them of their lack of it. They couldn't handle your authenticity because it magnified their performance. You were the mirror, and they were terrified of what it showed. They thought they were gathering intel, but what they gathered was evidence of themselves. Watching you became unbearable because you didn't bend, you didn't react, you didn't mask. You simply were. And in that raw presence, their illusions began to crumble. Light doesn't need to destroy darkness. It just needs to exist long enough for darkness to realize it was never solid to begin with. You didn't win by exposing them. You won by being unexposed, pure, grounded, transparent. They couldn't handle it, because once they saw themselves through you, they couldn't unsee it. Number 6. You broke their system by refusing to malfunction. They fed on fear. You answered with joy, and the whole machine started glitching. Control collapses when peace refuses to participate. Your calm wasn't weakness. It was sabotage wrapped in stillness. They didn't expect your joy to be that dangerous, but it fried their entire script. They built systems designed to predict you, control you, collapse you. The algorithm ran on fear, on buttons pressed, patterns exploited, chaos injected. But you didn't respond the way they programmed you to. You laughed when they expected panic. You smiled when the trap was set. You kept your peace when everything around you was screaming for a reaction. And that broke the machine. They thought you'd be another equation, a formula of pain equals submission, of shame equals silence. But you didn't compute. You didn't shut down. You didn't feed the loop. Every time they tried to corner you emotionally, you slipped out, not through aggression, but through grace. You were the first virus they couldn't track because you weren't infecting the system, you were healing it from the inside. Imagine a machine built to scan for threats. It detects anger, fear, guilt, and responds with punishment. Then imagine something it can't detect: joy, peace, clarity. It starts to glitch, not because the code is broken, but because the input was never anticipated. That's what your presence did. Your smile didn't just feel good, it disarmed them. Your stillness wasn't neutral, it was nuclear. You didn't fight the program, you refused to fuel it, and that's more disruptive than any rebellion. They expected a scream. You gave them silence, they designed chaos. You walked in with calm. The program wasn't ready for that. Because you didn't play defense, you redefined the game. They wanted compliance. You gave consciousness. They wanted control. You became clarity. They wanted emotion to be a weapon. You turned it into a mirror. You unplugged from their frequency the moment you chose real joy, not performative happiness, but grounded truth. And the system couldn't recover. No simulation can recreate an awakened soul. No machine can contain a being who's no longer programmable. You weren't the glitch, you were the awakening. And their algorithm, it crashed trying to understand you. Number 7, you made them see themselves, and that was the real threat. You didn't call them out. You called them in to a truth they buried and feared. You didn't break their system, you broke their self-denial. Your presence was a mirror, and they flinched because the reflection wasn't you, it was them. The most dangerous thing you ever did was remind them of who they used to be. They thought they were untouchable, protected by titles, roles, systems, and masks. They hid behind procedure, policies, and personas, cold, distant, calculated. But when you showed up, not with aggression, not with confrontation, but simply with presence. Something inside them cracked. You didn't speak judgment. You didn't raise your voice, but your energy disrupted their internal silence. Your vibration made noise in the one place they couldn't mute, their own conscience. You didn't need to expose them. You weren't there to fight, but your light was real, unapologetic, unfiltered, and it hit them in the exact place they thought was dead. That's why they reacted the way they did. Nervous, avoidant, dismissive. It wasn't you they were trying to escape. It was the version of themselves they buried long ago, and your presence resurrected it. Imagine walking through a hallway you've sealed shut for years. Then one day, someone else walks by, and the door creaks open, not from force, but from frequency. That's what you did. Your essence vibrated at a level they forgot existed, a level that carried memory, conscience, truth, and it echoed in them, loud, uncomfortable, undeniable. They didn't fear you. They feared what they remembered in your presence, who they used to be before the compromise, before the masks, before the power games. You reminded them of realness, of depth, of spirit. You reminded them that something within them was still alive, and that terrified them more than any punishment ever could. Because once awareness is activated, it doesn't shut off. Once truth is seen, it doesn't disappear. You didn't awaken rebellion, you awakened recognition, and now every time they see you, they feel that echo. You weren't just a disruption to the system, you were a reminder of the soul, and that was unforgivable. Number 8. You saw through them before they even spoke a word. You didn't need to catch them in the act. You already felt it in the air. They rehearsed their masks. You read their frequency. Some people see with their eyes. You saw with your being. How do you fool someone whose energy reads louder than your voice ever could? They thought they were hidden. They thought their silence was protection. But you already knew. Not because of evidence, not because of gossip, not because someone warned you, but because your spirit caught the signal before your mind even had time to name it. You could walk into a room and feel the lie in the walls. You could shake a hand and taste the betrayal behind the smile. You were never guessing. You were decoding vibrations in real time. That's what made them tremble, because no matter how polished their disguise, your knowing pierced right through it. You didn't wait for proof. You were the proof. Your gut didn't ask for permission. It spoke first. And when it spoke, it was accurate. That made people with hidden agendas shake in their skin, because you could see through them before they even knew what mask to wear. Imagine someone trying to hide behind a curtain made of fog, thin, wispy, see-through to anyone who's awake. That's how their deception looked to you. Transparent. And what frustrated them most? You didn't even react. You let them talk. You let them posture. But inside, your spirit had already clocked them, filed the truth, and moved accordingly. Your perception wasn't cold logic. It was energetic intelligence. While others relied on words and actions, you read silence, tone, hesitation, aura. You read the room the way others read a manual, and that made you dangerous in a world that thrives on illusion. You didn't need to catch them. You already saw them. That's why they feared you. Because how do you lie to someone who already knows the truth without looking? Number 9. You reflected their rot without saying a word. You didn't challenge them. You revealed them just by being whole in a world built on pretending. Some people break mirrors because they hate what they see. Your peace didn't make them calm, it made them confront their own chaos. You weren't a threat to their power. You were a threat to their illusion of it. They didn't want to understand you. They wanted to measure you, manipulate you, reduce you. But every time they tried to study you, you reflected their motives back at them. That was the real trigger, because your very presence exposed the cracks in their performance. You didn't act superior. You didn't argue or posture. You simply existed, truthfully, peacefully, freely. And that made them feel painfully small. They needed you to feel beneath them. They needed control, validation, superiority, but your independence shattered that script. You didn't need approval to breathe. You didn't need to be seen to feel worthy. You moved from truth, and that kind of self-containment is dangerous in a world addicted to control. Imagine a spotlight turning on in a room full of actors. Some panic, some freeze, some run. That's what your presence became, a light too honest for masks to survive. They thought they could handle you, but they weren't prepared for the way you made them feel. Because next to your authenticity, their manipulation looked like a cheap trick. The more they watched you, the more insecure they became. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't have to. Your peace said, "I don't need what you're chasing." Your stillness said, "I've already found what you've buried." And your existence, without performance, made their entire identity feel manufactured. You didn't expose their lies with words. You made them visible by contrast. You became the mirror, and in that mirror, they saw everything they lost: their softness, their sincerity, their sense of self. You reminded them what it looked like to be real, and that hurt more than any confrontation ever could. They didn't fear your strength, they feared their reflection in your light. Number 10. You broke their grip by refusing to play the game. Control doesn't work on someone who's no longer performing. They didn't lose power because you fought them. They lost it because you stopped caring. They were puppeteers pulling strings until you stopped being the puppet. True power is when your silence becomes louder than their threats. They built their whole strategy on one fragile belief: that if they watched you, monitored you, manipulated the environment around you, they could control you. But control only works when someone is still emotionally tied to approval, fear, or outcome. And you weren't. You unplugged, you detached, and just like that, the whole structure collapsed. You didn't make a scene, you didn't retaliate, you didn't call them out. You did something far more terrifying. You stopped reacting, you stopped explaining, you stopped proving, and in that stillness, you reclaimed your freedom. You didn't fight for control, you showed them that it never existed in the first place, not over you. Imagine someone trying to steer a ship that no longer answers the wheel. That's what you became, untouchable. Not because you resisted, but because you transcended the need to engage. You moved from within, while they sat behind screens, behind policies, behind silence, pulling strings. They suddenly realized the strings weren't connected to you anymore. They could track your movements, but not your essence. They could measure your output, but not your spirit. They didn't understand how your calm could be so disruptive. But that's the truth about real sovereignty. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to scream. It simply refuses to be moved. Your silence wasn't submission, it was mastery. While they expected outbursts, you gave them stillness. While they expected fear, you moved with freedom. And that terrified them, because it showed them something they couldn't unsee. Their power was never real. It only worked when you believed in it. Now you don't, and that's why they're losing. Number 11. You turned their obsession into their own breakdown. They watched you to steal power, but you reversed the current. You didn't speak. You didn't fight. You just made them feel everything they were trying to project onto you. They entered your field to feed and left facing themselves. True power isn't taken. It's reflected back to the source until it burns. They didn't just observe you, they fixated on you. They studied your moves, tried to drain your light, poked at your peace, hoping for cracks they could crawl into. They thought attention would give them leverage. But what they never realized is this: energy flows both ways. And while they were busy focusing on you, they were unraveling in their own spotlight. You didn't respond. You didn't lash out. You simply held your frequency. You became the mirror, not the battlefield. And that mirror reflected more than they were ready to see. Their attempts to provoke you didn't weaken you. They amplified you. And each time they tried to siphon your strength, they were unknowingly exposing their own emptiness. Imagine trying to hold fire in your bare hands. That's what obsessing over your light did to them. They thought they could absorb your glow, but your energy wasn't there to be stolen. It was a test. The more they watched, the more they burned. Because your silence wasn't absence, it was voltage. You flipped the polarity. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't play their game. You simply stood still and let their own intent return to them like an echo with teeth. And it drained them, not because you were cruel, but because you were clear. Clear energy is confrontational to those who thrive in distortion. They came thinking they could extract from you, but they walked away exposed, agitated, confused. Why? Because real power doesn't beg to be seen. It makes others see themselves. And that's what you did. You didn't fight. You transformed without a word, and that's what made them crumble. Number 12. You became the glitch that fried every hidden agenda. You weren't a target. They were the virus. You were just the firewall that rejected them silently. They didn't malfunction because you fought them. They malfunctioned because you didn't. You weren't hard to understand. You were too pure for corrupted code to process. Your presence didn't block the attack. It rendered it irrelevant. You weren't just protected. You were protection, not just for yourself, but for the energy around you. You didn't absorb toxicity. You reflected it. You didn't fight manipulation. You confused it. You were a walking firewall, silently rejecting everything that wasn't aligned. They approached you like they approached every target, with control scripts, emotional malware, and spiritual viruses designed to invade. But nothing worked. Every system they sent glitched on impact. Every tactic froze mid-execution. Not because you were guarded, but because your frequency was too clean, too elevated, too encoded in truth. You didn't run from the darkness, you revealed it. You stood so calm, so still, so rooted in awareness that every manipulator couldn't help but stutter. Their code didn't work on you because you didn't run on ego, fear, or validation. You ran on awareness. Your smile wasn't compliance, it was calibration. It told the room, I'm locked in, try me and watch yourself unravel. Imagine trying to hack a system that doesn't run on your language. That's what you were to them. They tried emotional manipulation, guilt, gaslighting, power games. But you didn't take the bait, not because you were blind, but because you were already firewalled, not guarded by fear, but encrypted by peace. You didn't block them with anger, you blocked them with stillness. You didn't need walls, you had vibration. And that vibration was a no-entry signal for anything impure. You made people feel their own manipulation the second they tried to project it. They didn't short-circuit because you fought back. They short-circuited because you didn't. You didn't play the game, you broke it simply by standing in truth. And that's what makes you untouchable. Number 13. They came to watch you, but left changed by their own reflection. Their curiosity was never harmless. It was the start of their unraveling. They came to observe you, but your stillness turned into their awakening. You didn't convert them with force. You revealed them with light. The truth didn't shout. It stood there in silence, wearing your face. At first, they watched you out of intrigue. You were different, too calm, too intuitive, too untouchable. They couldn't place you. So they stared, quietly, trying to figure out what made you move the way you did. But what began as curiosity turned into something else, something heavier, something irreversible. They didn't just observe you, they encountered themselves. Your peace confronted their chaos, not through confrontation, but through reflection. You didn't speak condemnation, you didn't push ideology, you didn't try to teach them anything, but your presence forced accountability, because you carried the one thing they'd buried, truth. And truth, when embodied without ego, becomes its own form of quiet conversion. Imagine a person peering into water, expecting to see you, and instead seeing every wound they've ignored, every lie they've clung to, every version of themselves they abandoned. That's what your presence did. Your light didn't burn them, it revealed them. And for those hiding in distortion, revelation feels like punishment. They thought they had control. They thought their distance made them immune. But you didn't need closeness to penetrate. You didn't need permission to activate recognition. You just stood in your truth, calm, clear, undeniable. And they started to feel things they hadn't felt in years: guilt, longing, grief, hunger for the real. You reminded them of what they used to be, of what they gave up to gain approval, power, or protection. You weren't preaching, you were being, and that being was louder than any doctrine. Your energy translated directly to their nervous system, bypassing words. And that's why they couldn't look away until it hurt too much to keep looking. That's the power you hold, not to destroy darkness, but to transform it. Simply by refusing to become it. You didn't debate, you didn't persuade, you just reflected, and that reflection turned watchers into witnesses, and witnesses into awakened souls. Number 14. They could watch your moves, but they couldn't touch your spirit. They tracked your steps, but never found your source. Surveillance can capture movement, but it can't decode meaning. Your existence turned their watching into self-exposure. They weren't studying you, they were standing in the presence of what they feared to become. They had cameras, they had eyes, they had systems set up to catch your every move, trace your behaviors, predict your next step. But no matter how much they recorded, they couldn't understand what moved you. They watched your body, but they never touched your being, because spirit isn't something you can trap in footage. It isn't a pattern, it's presence. They logged your reactions, measured your silence, documented your steps, but what they missed was your essence. What they overlooked was that your evolution was never about where you walked. It was about what you carried. You didn't just survive surveillance, you disarmed it. You made it obsolete. Imagine trying to measure the wind with a ruler. That's what they were doing, trying to analyze energy with broken tools. You weren't operating on a frequency they could process. You were moving on the current of something they couldn't name. That's why their control kept failing, because control only works on the visible. But you became invisible in plain sight. They could never pin you down because you were never static. You were transformation in motion, a frequency too fluid for formats. Every time they tried to define you, you outgrew the definition. You were too free to be framed, too awake to be tracked, too real to be rendered. You didn't survive being watched. You flipped the lens, because the longer they stared, the more they revealed. Their hunger for power, their insecurity, their obsession with the unpredictable. They weren't watching you. They were watching their own reflection distorted in your light. You became the glitch in their surveillance, the smile they couldn't decode, the peace that couldn't be programmed, the presence that exposed the hollowness of their control. And in the end, your silence spoke louder than their systems. Your frequency shattered their format, and your evolution. That became the revelation. If this message hit something deep in you, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been quietly breaking the system with their presence. Drop a comment below. Tell us what resonated most. Until next time, stay untraceable, stay powerful, and never forget, they were never watching you. They were watching themselves in the mirror of your light. And now, as the dust settles and the truth stands uncovered, one thing is undeniable. You were never the subject. You were always the signal. They tried to monitor, decode, and diminish you, but your presence revealed more about them than it ever did about you. You didn't just survive their gaze, you transformed under it. You became the glitch, the firewall, the mirror, and the awakening. If this message hit home, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop 77 in the comments to claim your light. Share this with someone silently breaking systems with their presence. Your evolution is unstoppable.